Welcome. Today we'll be going over Chapter 40, Highway Safety and Vehicle Extrication. We'll be covering highway emergency operations and vehicle extrication in this chapter. Oncoming traffic at highway incidents is one of the greatest hazards emergency responders face today. Responding agencies and personnel need to be cognizant of their responsibilities in these types of hazardous environments. EMS response should be limited to only the manpower and vehicles needed to accomplish the mission. These scenes can become crowded with extra vehicles and personnel that are just unnecessary. The first arriving unit should institute blocking to protect the work area. This is preferably a fire apparatus. Several reasons. One, it's bigger, it protects more of the scene, and two, if you're there, especially if you're the only transporting ambulance, if your vehicle does get struck, we're not going to be able to transport any patients with that ambulance. If it is necessary to block lanes of traffic, clear them quickly as possible so that flow of traffic can return to normal. A vehicle collision where extrication of the patient is required is the most common type of rescue across the United States. Limited access highways, only primary or first due units should proceed directly to the scene. On-scene units park in a single file in the same direction to minimize on-scene congestion. I will say, that being said, sometimes it's not conducive to park in the same direction. We've talked about it before, but one of the things about parking an ambulance is considering your means of egress from that scene. So when we go to leave, what makes the most sense? It sets us up for success to leave the scene. The first arriving units should establish command and confirm the exact location of the incident with dispatch. Use apparatus to institute upstream blocking to protect the work area. Rescue trucks arriving to perform extrication should be positioned downstream of initial blocking vehicle. We also need to determine the number of patients that we have on scene to see if we need to request additional transport, whether that's a ground ambulance or helicopter. Create 1.5 to 2 lanes of blockage. We want to protect more than just the single lane that we're working in. Position your apparatus at an angle with the front wheels rotated away from the incident. If that vehicle does get struck from behind, it will somewhat roll toward the direction that those wheels are turned. So if we have the vehicle parked at an angle, but the wheels are rotated toward the incident, there is a likelihood that if that vehicle were to get struck, it would move toward the incident and not away. For the other apparatus, leave space immediately next to the crash for vehicle extrication units. Position ambulances, command vehicles, and other units downstream from the crash. This allows safer patient loading and rapid departure from the scene. Responders should always exit into the safe zone if possible after checking to be sure traffic has stopped. Communicate, look out for oncoming traffic, and monitor when it is safe to exit. I personally know several people who have been struck while on scene of traffic accidents. I remember early on in my fire career, we had a door of a ladder truck get taken off when the captain opened the door to exit the vehicle. Luckily, he was okay, but vehicle safety is very important all the time, but on these vehicle accidents, depending on the type of road you're working on, carries a huge likelihood for injury. So we need to make sure that we are being extremely safe. All responders should be in full protective clothing or at a minimum ANSI approved safety vests and helmets. Place flares or traffic cones to slow traffic and channel it away from the incident scene. For night operations, shut off the vehicle's headlights and white response lights. The best combination of lights to provide maximum visibility are the red and amber warning lights being on, headlights and fog lights off, and traffic directional boards operating if your ambulance is outfitted with one. So some things to think about. Is it safe to enter the highway scene? I would probably reword that question if this were my slideshow. Is it safe to enter the scene of an accident, regardless of where it's at? Obviously, there are a lot of potential concerns on a vehicle accident scene. Hazardous materials, downed power lines, the number of vehicles that are involved in the accident, where they're located in the road or in the scene, and which units are necessary. We may not need every unit that is responding. We may have to cancel some. A crowded scene may be an unsafe scene. There's no need to have unnecessary vehicles and personnel there. That would just increase the probability of being involved in an accident with an emergency vehicle. So phases of vehicle extrication: there's preparing for the rescue, sizing up the situation, recognizing and managing hazards, stabilizing the vehicle prior to entering, and then gaining access to the patient. So this takes specialized training and resources. So you should know, the capabilities of your local fire departments, which agency is closest to you that has the equipment necessary for the job. Continuing, we have providing the primary patient assessment and rapid trauma assessment, disentangling the patient if needed, immobilizing and extricating the patient from the vehicle, providing assessment, care, and transport to the most appropriate hospital, and terminating the rescue. So your primary patient assessment and rapid trauma assessment may need to be done in the vehicle. We will go over a lot of that stuff in class, but there's no reason to delay your assessment and possible care just because they're still entrapped. If there's room for a provider to be in there safely, then we need to make that happen. Preparing for the rescue, there's a combination of training, practice, and the right protective gear and tools. And the availability of training will depend on the kinds of rescues you are most likely to have in your area. You guys know my stance on high risk, low frequency events. Sizing up the situation: conduct a good scene size up to evaluate hazards and address the need for additional resources. So how many patients are involved? What is their priority? And consider the mechanism of injury. What are additional ambulances needed, whether that's an air ambulance or a ground ambulance, depending on where you're located and what resources you have available to you, and what is the extent of the patient's entrapment. If this is something where the patient's going to be entrapped for a prolonged time, like I discussed earlier, we may need to move forward with doing an assessment and treatment while they're still in the vehicle. What does scene size up tell me about the need for extrication? So, for example, I don't like war stories, but I arrived on a scene at one point in my career as a paramedic on an ambulance, and the local fire department was telling me that they had their rescue truck en route with extrication equipment because the patient needed to be extricated because they could not get the doors open. When I looked at the vehicle, I thought to myself, that doesn't look like enough damage to prevent doors from opening. So what we did, we busted out the back passenger window. The only occupant of the vehicle was the driver. We gained access to the vehicle that way, and I reached across the driver and unlocked the door from the inside, and we opened the driver's side door. It's kind of an extremely simple, easy example, but the scene size up can tell you a lot. as far as the need for extrication and, like we talked about, hazards, potential concerns, and then our other considerations for how many patients are there, do we need additional resources. Protective gear for EMS responders. At a crash, any personnel working in the inner circle should wear full protective turnout gear to avoid being injured. Most EMS responders do not have turnout gear. When I talked about gaining access to the patient compartment and working on a patient, there has to be a lot of communication between the EMS personnel and the fire department. And you have to consider your personal safety, risk reward, that thing. If your service does not provide protective gear, then you can get your own. If anyone is interested in that, I can show you how to get it, show you where to get it. It is pricey. So when we're working in traffic, you can wear a helmet, wear safety vests to enhance visibility. The safety vests, that's a no excuse. I've never worked in an ambulance that didn't have plenty of safety vests for everybody working on the ambulance. So you need to be wearing those vests when working in highway operations. That is a federal highway standard, but that is a very simple thing to improve your personal safety on scene. During extrication operations, there's an increased risk of exposure to flame, glass, fluids, and sharp objects. When the fire department makes a cut on, a post, B post, C post of a vehicle, those metal ends are very sharp. During extrication classes, the instructor may go behind and put some, out of service fire hose sections on there so that no one gets cut. But on an operating a real emergency, there's not normally somebody that goes in there and makes sure that those sharp objects are covered. So those exposed ends of the metal where it's been cut with tools are very sharp. The best practice is for EMS or firefighters to wear turnout gear, including a helmet and eye protection. Match the level others are wearing, so you can look at other workers in the industry and see what they're utilizing. So we have helmets, eye protection, hand protection, and body protection. So beyond wearing just rubber gloves, I definitely, if you're working on a vehicle accident, suggest wearing some type of leather palmed gloves. To protect your patient, you should have an aluminized rescue blanket, a lightweight vinyl coated tarp, a wool blanket, and then short and long spine boards. Definitely cover up your patient. While they're making those cuts, we've already discussed the sharp metal edges, but glass is everywhere in these accidents. A lot of times it'll already be on your patient from the accident itself. But we need to prevent any further injury from happening to them. So covering them up, preventing anything from getting on them. Hard hats, safety goggles, industrial hearing protectors, disposable dust masks, and thermal masks. Consider putting that stuff on your patient. And emotional support for the patient. This is as simple as communicating with your patient, letting them know, who you are, what's happening around them. Even if they're not alert and oriented, they may be confused. It's still important for us to try and provide as much emotional support as we can. For managing traffic, use the ambulance and its warning lights as the first form of traffic control and position other warning devices as soon as possible. So if we're the first arriving unit on scene, we will position the ambulance at an angle behind the incident to protect the scene so that we can get to work. When the fire department shows up, most of the time that the larger fire apparatus is going to park behind your ambulance. You may decide to move the ambulance at that point, but we need to get a different apparatus to protect the scene as soon as we can. Use flares for traffic control. Look for and avoid any spilled fluid, dry vegetation, other combustibles, especially right at the road's edge. Don't throw any flares out of a moving vehicle. Position a few flares at the edge of the danger zone as soon as the ambulance is parked. If you're using flares, take a handful and walk carefully toward oncoming traffic. Position the flares about every 10 feet if possible to channel vehicles into an unblocked lane. If the collision has occurred on a two-lane road, position flares in both directions. Be careful when lighting the flare. Never use the flare as a traffic wand. Airbags are designed to inflate on impact, dissipate kinetic energy, and minimize trauma to the body. This creates a smoke in the vehicle, which is mostly cornstarch and talcum powder. Sometimes it may be sodium hydroxide. This can be irritating to patients sometimes. They may complain of some respiratory problems due to that. Don't stop your assessment of a respiratory problem and say, yeah, it's probably just from the smoke that the airbag created. Do a proper assessment and make sure that there's not a deeper underlying cause that's life-threatening. Watch for any airbags that remain undeployed after a crash. If there's any electricity still going to anything, even sometimes when the electricity is cut, they may have a charge still and can deploy if triggered. If the bumpers were involved in the collision, you may notice that the bumper's shock absorber system is compressed or loaded. Some vehicles have these shock absorbers in the bumper, and when that deploys, it can actually launch the bumper off the vehicle. So never stand in front of a loaded bumper. Stand diagonally or perpendicular. In close proximity to fires, emergency responders should approach the vehicle at a 45-degree angle and not head on if there's going to be an attempt at either fire suppression or patient care. Again, on a vehicle accident, there's a lot of things that can reach out and grab you. You need to remain cognizant of all the threats on scene. Spectators may interfere with rescue and emergency care efforts in addition to traffic. This happens pretty often. If policies permit, ask responsible-looking bystanders to keep spectators away. This is really a job for law enforcement when they arrive on scene, and obviously they do a good job of keeping the spectators at bay. If you have barricade tape, I would delegate that to a responder if possible and not a responsible-looking bystander. Definitely don't put any bystanders or spectators in an unsafe position. You may be held liable in an adverse event. Electrical hazards. High voltage lines are common. Assume the entire area around the exposed wire is dangerous. Ordinary protective clothing gives no protection against electrocution. A broken utility pole with wires down is very dangerous. You set up a large safety zone and discourage occupants of a collision from leaving the wreckage. Determine the number of the nearest pole you can safely approach and ask your dispatcher to advise the power company of the pole number and its location. Do not attempt to move any downed wires. Stand in a safe place until the power company disconnects the power or cuts the wire. A broken utility pole with wires intact, park the ambulance outside the danger zone and notify your dispatcher of the situation. Stay outside the danger zone until the power company representatives can de-energize the conductors and stabilize the pole. Keep spectators and other emergency personnel out of the danger zone. A damaged pad-mounted transformer. Request an immediate power company response. Do not touch either the transformer case or a vehicle touching it. You need to warn other emergency personnel. Stand in a safe place until the power company de-energizes it, and keep spectators out of the danger zone. Small fires, a 15 or 20 pound class ABC dry chem fire extinguisher extinguishes almost anything that's burning. You can put out quite a lot of fire with an ABC extinguisher, but it's got to be fairly small. A fire in the engine compartment, do not attempt extinguishing unless the hood is fully open, or if you can open it, and we don't have turnout gear. So trying to touch a safety latch that may be hot, you need to have protective gear on. We're not trying to be firefighters in our EMS pants and a t-shirt. If there's a fire in the passenger compartment or the trunk, apply the extinguisher sparingly until occupants can be freed. If it's in a trunk, apply the same principles as the engine compartment and leave extinguishment to the fire department. A fire under the vehicle, you can sweep the flames from under the passenger compartment. Truck fires, an ABC extinguisher, if this is like a semi-truck or a commercial vehicle, a lot of times they will be labeled for where the fire extinguisher is on their vehicle. You don't have to utilize yours. Burning truck tires are especially dangerous. Never stand directly in front of a truck wheel when there's a fire. Flames can spread to the vehicle's body and cargo, or the tires can explode. Many cars have electrically powered door locks, window operators, and seat adjustment mechanisms. To disarm or to disable the electrical system, we need to cut battery cables. That's normally done by the fire department. We don't normally go disconnect the negative battery cables or anything. Once that's done, you can no longer utilize the electric seat adjustment mechanism. So stabilizing a vehicle, if the vehicle is on its wheels, turn off the engine and step chock at least 3 sides. Here's a picture of them using cribbing to stabilize a vehicle that's on its wheels. A vehicle on its side you can stabilize with rope, cribbing, or stabilizer bars. A vehicle on its roof, utilize 4x4 wood blocks to build a crib box. So here's a vehicle on its side, stabilized with struts. So simple access, check to see if the door or window can be opened. Try before you pry. Unless there's extensive damage to the vehicle, a lot of times, if the door is unlocked, you can open the door. Complex access, that's when we're going to utilize tools and equipment. Break glass on the side or rear window as far from the passengers as possible. So gain access by disposing of doors and the roof if necessary. Make the vehicle interior accessible. Create as big of an exit as you can or as is necessary without taking extra time. Quick access to a critical patient can improve survivability and perhaps decrease morbidity. Disentangle occupants by displacing the front end. This can be accomplished with jacks and hacksaws. Do not cut the steering column or airbag wiring that may cause unexpected firing of the airbag. Chapter review. Remember, highway operations are high risk. Take these precautions. Wear high visibility garments. Position the ambulance for blocking until fire apparatus arrives, then position the ambulance downstream in the safe zone. Reduce lighting that may blind passing drivers. Avoid crossing traffic lanes with patients. Scene size up is key. We need to know how many patients are there, what is their triage status, and are additional resources needed. Protect yourself. Look out for traffic, undeployed airbags, loaded bumpers, and sharp metal. When possible, match the level of PPE worn by other public safety responders. Ensure scene safety. If wires are down, keep spectators back. If wires are over an occupied car, don't allow the occupants to exit until the power company deactivates the wires. Make sure the vehicle is stable. Be sure that it won't roll away or tip over. The first thing you need to do is try simple means to gain access. We don't need to do anything that will prolong us getting to the patient. Protect your patient during the extrication process. A lot of debris can fly around. Broken glass that's laying somewhere can fly whenever a post gets cut or something slips away from a tool. Everything that's on that surface can fly around. So cover up your patients, keep them protected from everything going on. Remember, highway response is a significant safety hazard for EMTs. Specific safety planning and procedures must be utilized to keep responders safe. Responding units should evaluate the need for further units, institute blocking to protect the work area, and always exit the apparatus into a safe zone. Use protective equipment and warning devices. Vehicle extrication often requires specialized training and resources. Know your local resources and procedures for activating those resources. Determine extrication resources needed and patient extrication priority through a thorough scene size-up. Extrication can pose a variety of threats. Evaluate the scene carefully and employ safety procedures. Gaining access to patients frequently requires mechanical and technological assistance. Always start simply and escalate only when simple measures fail. Some questions to consider. What is the best access for my unit? Not only access, but also leaving the scene. We need to know what makes the most sense for placement of the ambulance. So where should I park the apparatus? And does the vehicle need to be stabilized? Sometimes, depending on the accident, this is as simple as putting the vehicle in park and removing the keys. You may put a chock block underneath it. When the occupants of the vehicle need extricated and we're going to be applying force, we need to make sure the vehicle is stabilized, even if it's on its wheels with chock blocks. And obviously, if the vehicle is on its side or on its roof, then that vehicle needs to be stabilized. All right, that is it for chapter 40. Thank you all.